Hello and welcome everybody to CICD, the Azure Cloud Workshop Continuous Delivery Novice to Dangerous in DevOps. What I'm going to start with here is kind of give you some of the basics, teach you a little bit about like maybe why we want continuous delivery and what has led to the industry valuing this skill. I'd like to start by introducing myself. I'm Alec Harrison. I am a cloud enthusiast in Des Moines, Iowa originally, recently relocated to Omaha, Nebraska. I run the Iowa Microsoft Azure User Group and the Kansas City Azure User Group. Just really like cloud. I feel like it's one of those things I heard about a lot in college with a lot of other titles or other words. People just kind of hand-waved it and they're like, oh yeah, the cloud, blah, 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 it's going to change the world. So with one of those hand-wavy things, I decided to pick one of them and really try to focus on understanding at least a little bit about it, of what that means. So for me, that was kind of getting to know how this all works as far as cloud stuff and kind of where it came from. So I think to go back a little bit for how we got to where we are today, you need to go back to kind of how IT organizations were built in the past. You would have your on-premise infrastructure, and you would essentially have to go through the order process to, buy your infrastructure and get that provisioned by an expert who could do the physical, like disk mounting, who could order the physical hardware. Got to wait for your hardware delivery person to bring it in and do all that. And you essentially had to used to have physical hardware that would always at least meet or exceed whatever your maximum throughput or utilization was. Well, that would mean you'd have a lot of bandwidth typically that was just not used, because you'd say be Amazon or Microsoft, where you'd have, in Amazon's case, like Black Friday, Cyber Monday, those days where your peaks are the highest of highs, and you need to be able to support that so your company can serve all your customers. But other days, on random Tuesday, say in September, your throughput is not going to be nearly what it is on Cyber Monday. And you're also not going to have deals or marketing that's pushing traffic there. So where cloud kind of came in is, how do I, as somebody who has, say, massive amounts of servers, like your Microsofts, your Amazon, your Googles, that, yeah, I do have some peak utilization, but for the most part, my stuff is kind of sitting here collecting dust, except for those peak days. That was kind of the brainchild that brought Amazon's AWS and then eventually GCP and Azure all around the same time. With some virtualization of machines, you could then define machines and servers in the cloud without it being necessarily tied to a specific, I have a computer and a server somewhere. It could be a massive bandwidth, massive supply of resources, computer, or piece of hardware, server, hosting multiple computers, for lack of a better term. So with that coming in, you have companies like AWS who, buying all this hardware is something they just have to do anyway. Any money they can make on top of that, of hardware that's obviously just sitting there doing nothing, is money they didn't have before. So then you start driving down the prices. You start switching stuff to consumption-based, because as Amazon or as Azure for Microsoft, I'm going to charge you on what you use, not just on this expensive hardware you have sitting in a closet that you might use. So that starts to be more palatable to other companies of, okay, we can switch to a consumption-based model. I don't have to buy, a $10,000, $30,000 network hardware, have a specialist who can configure it just to sit in a closet and be underutilized. I can instead pay maybe less of that money, push some of that onto my developers to be full stack developers, and they can easily provision what they need when they need it and get rid of it when they don't. So you end up saving money in the long run and at scale. And then you don't have to worry about having physical on-prem infrastructure to secure, to worry about it being able to scale up to your maximum usage and utilization. all of that's just kind of taken care of for you. So let's go back kind of to the Azure Cloud Workshop. Where does that fit in? Microsoft used to have or they still do for certain things, called Microsoft Cloud Workshops. The intent of these, and I will show you the one we're talking about today. The intent of these were to originally have free online training materials for particular topics or hot button issues to help you get into the cloud. The continuous integration, and they had one around Azure DevOps that was being sunset. So the impetus of this was, maybe you don't want to use Azure DevOps to deploy. Maybe you want to use GitHub Actions. Maybe you don't care about some of the other things there. So we rewrote it. Brian and I are rewriting some of these to be more streamlined, to ensure that any resources that we ask you to provision as a part of the walkthrough are as cheap or as close to free as possible. There's also some things in there when you walk through the training materials that they make assumptions like you have Visual Studio Enterprise licenses and have a budget to spend money. I'd rather make the assumption that you're like me, you don't have money that you would just blow, or if you do, you want to be very conservative or very aware when money's going to be spent, so you can minimize that or at least know what to deprovision when needed. So how this cloud workshop came about was just talking about basic CI/CD. I know nothing. How do I get into that? Because if you're, again, talking about the cloud, talking about CI/CD, these things can be scary. They truly can. I remember my first experience with Google Cloud. I got a $300 credit, and I was like, oh, sweet, this is awesome. I'm going to live on this forever. And I don't fully understand what I did wrong, but I spent that $300 credit within 3 days. And that scared me. I immediately shut off everything, deleted everything, canceled my GCP account, was like, this is scary. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm going to somehow charge myself hundreds of thousands of dollars, and I'm going to learn nothing from it. So the other thing we're hoping you'll get out of this is feeling safe to experiment and learn. So with this one, it is a free Open Anybody MIT license. Feel free to do what you need to do with it. Feel free to share it, give it at different conferences, any of that sort of stuff. And this will be part one of this talk. We may not get all the way through, but if you want to go and follow along at home or do this yourself at a self-paced, here's the link. Feel free to do so, and feel free to pass it along to anybody who you think this might be helpful to. So, taking a few steps back, this walkthrough starts all the way back from you know nothing about software development, and maybe that's a little too extreme. It goes all the way back from like maybe you don't really know what GitHub is, maybe you don't really know what the tools are. So there's a few assumptions that we make, or that I make, prior to getting this off the ground. The first one is that you have a GitHub account. If you've never been to GitHub before, it's a free repo repository that allows you to have a certain amount of private repositories to store your code, as well as public ones like the organization you just saw there for Azure Cloud Workshops. The nice thing about this is you can share. It's really great for open source projects because you can get out and work with the people who you know, and they can contribute, commit, make changes, all that sort of fun stuff, and you can collaboratively iron out what you're potentially working on. The first assumption we're going to make is that you have a GitHub account and you have the GitHub CLI installed. What this does is it allows you to work with GitHub via the command line. You can get by with tools like Fork and Visual Studio Code. It's terminal to do all this. So we'll go ahead and walk through that really slow so you'll feel a better understanding. But this is just so you can programmatically access your GitHub account via your command line and make, clone, bring those files down and push them back up as needed. The second thing we're going to do is assume you have an Azure account. So I have some Azure account here. Yours will probably, if it's new, not have a recent section. that's okay. And we'll come back to here when we get there. I also have Azure Mask on. So there might be some differences, as you'll notice. It did disappear part of that. Just my email address. So there'll be certain things that you'll see here that are blurred out as we start going along this a little further. Don't be alarmed. I just have that on for security reasons so nothing gets compromised. So yours may look slightly different, but overall, probably the same. Visual Studio Code is another assumption we'll assume you have. Visual Studio Code is a lightweight editor. It's a lot of great reasons to have Visual Studio Code, but you can get by with any editor that you see fit. It's just nice. It has a terminal, so if you're on Mac or PC, a lot of these commands that we're walking through here today will be the same no matter what OS you're on. And finally, you'll want to make sure, well, you have the Azure CLI. And sorry, I said finally, but you also want the .NET CLI, because what we're going to do by the end of this is from Visual Studio Code, go to GitHub Actions. We're going to build our pipeline to deploy a .NET app to an app service, and then that will be something that we can accept or access, and then we can have approvals that'll go to further environments. For the sake of this video and for the sake of time, we might only get to about here. But the walkthrough does talk about multiple, and it's just rinse and repeat after the first one. So should be able to find your way through there on your own. And the reason for that is a lot of industry tend to have at least a non-prod and production environment. That's what prod stands for. So you have your first environment that you deploy your code to that the developers work on, goes out there. A lot of times that's where you will manually do QA. You can also, as a developer, typically go out there and you test, make sure everything works as expected. That way you don't push it out to real life users with unintended unintended issues like things breaking or any of that. So you can address it prior to real life people seeing it. So that was a lot. What we're going to want to start with is, and I'm going to start a new Visual Studio window over here. First thing we're going to want to do is you're going to want to create a new repository in GitHub. And it should show you here, and the repository name, we can call it anything you want. Novice to dangerous. And this is going to be a public repo. I will probably delete it once we're done with this, but it might be there. So the first thing we're going to do, this is your repository. If you've never been in GitHub before, this is where all your code's going to be stored. And this is eventually what our pipeline is going to look at to push things to Azure. So to get started, what we want to do is pull this over. So this is a Visual Studio window. We're going to want to make sure our terminal's running. And let me see if I can move myself out of the way here. So what we want to do is figure out where we're going to put our code. I typically have a directory called code on my Mac, so I'll cd into there. And then we're going to clone our repository. So one thing I did not show is we want to go to code and copy this link right here. You may need to set up your GitHub credentials, so you might need to search to GitHub credentials setup and walk through this as well. So once you have your GitHub credentials logged in, you should be able to do git for our GitHub CLI, clone, and that URL you just got. And then we'll cd into novice to dangerous to make sure our window is there. And you'll notice the only thing in here is that README file that we had previously. If Chrome wants to open up again, there we go. This file. I think we'll just do this. All right. So what we're going to start with, now that we have this cloned locally onto our machine, we're going to go to Azure. There's a few different concepts here. The biggest one to take away is, in order to do anything in Azure, you need a resource group. What a resource group is I like to think of it as a bucket. They're called stacks in AWS. It's kind of a similar concept. It's just something to house everything that you want to segment. What I've typically seen as a best practice is you segment it based on your product, so like what you're building, and then the resource or the environment and industry. So if you're building foo, for example, we might have a foo dev, and then a foo prod, and a foo test, and all that sort of stuff. Looks like we're good to create it. So we'll have a foo dev. You may also have a foo prod. For this example, again, we're just going to do one environment just for the sake of time. And this is one of the Azure masks-ish things I was telling you about that might look a little different on yours, but you might need that moving forward. So now that we have a resource group, we want to get some code up there. And we want to finish setting up the rest of this application. So now that we did that, we need to set up our Azure connection. So how do we do that? Well, we're going to first open up our terminal again. Do AZ login. What that is doing is it's going to open a window here, and you'll see it, asking me to log into my Azure account, and then behind the scenes it'll log in. And there it goes. So now you see some of my information there, and you'll see my resource group that I'm just logged in as, which is cool. So now I'm going to do Active Directory. We're going to want to create a way for the GitHub actions to connect to Azure. So what we're going to want to do is do Azure AD app create, and we're going to give it a display name of foo dev. Actually, we'll do foo dev like that. And we want to keep that app ID that we just got. So we're going to do Azure AD service principal. What a service principal is it allows you to do stuff in the cloud as if you're a person, but it's actually a programmatic identity or entity. Where did our app ID go? There it is. So we'll copy that, paste it. Oh, didn't do a space. Maybe keyboard shortcuts want to work. There we go. Perfect. Now the next thing we need to do is we need to assign a and this one's going to be long. So we're going to want to do AZ role assignment create role contributor. This is going to give contributor access to the service principal we just created. And we need the subscription ID that is, I'm going to move this off screen for a sec. Oh no, my subscription ID. Assign E object ID. That should be this. Now my head's getting in the way again. I want to do principal type, service principal, scope. We want to do subscriptions. I keep that wrong. And if you're struggling following along with any of this, that's fine. I have this all listed on that GitHub page as well, so don't worry about it. You can copy and paste this and plug in your own values. And this last part, what we're saying is, here's the resource group I want to give you permission to be a contributor to. And for this one, it is food dev. Oh. All right, and it says we're good. So, if you go through the walkthrough, I just realized we did this a little bit out of sync, but that's okay. The order doesn't matter too bad. What we're going to want to start to do is set up the .NET repository. So we'll start that with .NET new SLN, and it will be my app. That's just what we're going to call it. Oh. Help if I pass the name parameter. And we're going to then do .NET New Web API. And then if we do .NET Run, we should see that our server is hosted and listening. Alright, it says we're listening here. Let's click on that. 404. And that should be okay, because we want to do /weather forecast. And there we go. We got the weather forecast of some fake data. And that makes sense if we go back to our controller. Look here. All this is doing is just adding a bunch of random days, a random temperature, and just adding random stuff. So, it makes sense that we'd just get that. Now, one thing I'm going to do for the sake of this is create a folder called .NET app. I could have done this before, I'll be honest. I forgot, so we'll move that into here real quick. Just for the sake of this, that'll now be its new home. And now we're going to want to go into that project, cd.NET app, and then we're going to do .NET SLN add, and then we'll want to add the csproj file. What did I do? And this is adding the project to the solution. Just different C# terminology, not a huge deal. Alright, and the next thing we're going to do now is create a new, and I moved one too many things. I still want this solution at the top level. Now what we're going to do is create a unit test project with .NET New NUnit. The reason we're going to want to do this is a lot of times you're going to want to, and I'm going to want a folder for this now too. A lot of times you're going to want your developers to be writing unit tests as they write code so they can confirm that everything acts as it should. And then we're going to do .NET add reference, and it's going to be an unit, and it will be Novice to Dangerous CS Proj. Oh, sorry. In the end unit, we want to do .NET add .NET app to the. Oh, I missed it. Just keep hitting tab. There we go. All right, so now that we have some code, let's go to GitHub to start configuring some stuff over there. So what I'm going to want to do, go to Settings, Environments. I'm going to go to New Environment, and I'm going to do Dev, because it's going to be foo dev. And here's where we can apply required reviewers, await timer, secrets, deployment branches, all that sort of fun stuff. So, what we're going to do is get this ready to be set up to hit that. Now I'm going to run a command that looks like this. And what this is doing is saying, I am given that Azure has this application ID, I'm going to want you to be able to come in and deploy to my repository. And we'll need to change some of this stuff as well. So, I'm going to want to name this dev. And if you forgot what your application object ID is, you can actually get that in Azure. So if you come here, go to Azure Active Directory, go to App Registrations, all, and we are doing foo dev, and we want the object ID. Sorry, the client ID. My bad. Oh, I think I was wrong. Yep, I think I was right the first time. I think we want the object ID, not the client ID. Let's see. All right. And now that this worked out, we want this JSON. Go over here to GitHub. And I'm going to go to secrets. Environment secret. Actually, we'll go. Sorry, I want to go to this secrets. Action secret. And this is going to be, sorry, we're going to want this for our environment first. So what we want to do is for our pre-prod, we're going to have an Azure client ID. We also need a subscription and tenant ID. So to start with, we're going to go back to here. So this is going to be our Azure subscription ID, which you'll see here. And then we're going to add a Azure tenant ID, which you'll see. The easiest way to find this is if you go to Active Directory again, right here. And then we're going to want to create an environment variable for food dev, which is going to be Azure. And the client ID is because they could be different per client or per environment. So your subscription and tenant is going to be the same no matter what environment you're in, but this will not be. All right. So, now that we did that, we should be good to start working on the pipeline. So I'm going to go back over to here, and I'm going to create a new folder. So in GitHub, to create workflows, you're going to want GitHub/workflows. And in that folder, you're going to create a file called pipeline.yml. So YML is YAML notation. And what we're going to do is we want to say on. So this is when our pipeline is triggered. Say push to branches, and we'll include main. And then we're also going to want to do any pull requests on branches, also main. So this is saying if anybody pushes code to main or if anybody opens a pull request against main, we're going to run this pipeline. And then we need some permissions. Right. And contents read. This is how we get our tokens from Azure, is that section. So we can send out one, get it back, and read what we have. We're going to specify a job. So we're going to build. Oop. And then runs on. So we can specify an OS. Typically, I've seen Linux be the quickest. So we're going to do Ubuntu. Especially now that .NET is kind of OS agnostic. It doesn't really matter. Then the first thing we're going to do is we're going to check out our repository. So that allows, I want a space here. That allows our pipeline to have access to all these files. So the next thing we're going to do is set up the .NET Core SDK. So we need that in order to run our application, or sorry, to run our .NET commands that are going to allow us to test stuff. And this is a human readable name. Here's the action. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to install dependencies. Sorry, I got something in my eye. And that's a typo. Dot. Then we're going to do run. And then we're going to do a build. which will be run .NET build configuration piece. We're going to do a no restore because we've just restored right before this. And then we're going to do a test. So we'll run that test we have above. And finally, we're going to get a little bit ahead of ourselves, but since we're in the pipeline, actually we'll just wait a sec. So, now if we do this, I need to go out the directory, get add dot, which will add everything. And then get push. We should see all of this stuff starting to show up here. And where is it? There we go. Where are you? The pipeline? I might have. There we go. What did we do wrong? Ah, there is no S in pull requests. And there we go. We're off to the races, running our build command. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to start doing some infrastructure as code. So now we kind of have our thing, we've built it, and we need to basically tell Azure what kind of infrastructure we want to do to host it. So we're going to do infrastructure.bicep. So bicep is a cool language. It's used to be more human readable and like the next iteration of the Azure Resource Manager templates, or ARM templates, as some of you might be familiar. It just makes things a lot easier to read, and it's a lot easier to use. So the first thing we're going to do is a param for env. Again, this is built with the idea that you're going to want to do multiple things, multiple environments. So what param can allow you to do is set a default value. So we can assume that if nobody specifies anything, we're going to be deploying to dev. And then param best practice for location is to define it globally. And what we're going to do is do resource group dot location. What that'll do is it'll look at the resource group we deploy this into and say, hey, where are you? Because you can deploy your resource group to anywhere in the world, and you technically can then have resources in different parts of the world. But the best practice is kind of put your resource group closest to your primary user base to cut down on latency and whatnot, and then also to have the resources, if they can, be in the same resource group. So the first thing we're going to do is create a free app service plan. So you can kind of think of it as a few different ways. There is in running a system or computer, there's kind of your server or the machine, and then there's like the individual piece of it that you actually pick what you want to run. So the first thing we're going to do is declare a resource of an app service plan. An app service plan is your server. You can have multiple things on there. You don't need just a single one, and you can kind of go from there. I don't want certificates. Sorry, multiple fonts. Server farms. .web. Oh, and my autocomplete's going to be gone now because it's mad. So you can have multiple app services, is what it's called, running on app service plans. And that allows you to say, if you wanted to pay for essentially a really high capacity server, you could have multiple app service plans then running on it. And then the higher tier of your app service plan unlocks things like scale sets. You can scale up or down. You can scale out. So the higher app service plan, the more it's scaled up. The more scaled up by the higher plan. So that's more resources like RAM, CPU, all that. And then the higher the tiers, the more you can scale set and scale out. So the lowest one that you can be on to scale outward is a standard S1. And that's not the best way to scale if you're going to need to scale. It's typically better to figure out what your maximum load is and kind of try to peg into there. Because if you scale outward, you're essentially paying for 2 servers to run the same instance, which you might need if you hit a maximum. But there's better ways and better consumption plans if you are going to be regularly scaling. It's more of a stopgap if you're going to need it for a short term, or even sometimes a planned compute event, like running reports at the end of the day. You could potentially scale out very quickly, run all of your CPU intensive reports, and then quickly scale back in, so you're not paying a ton on that. If you're going to be going dynamically, though, you should really move to something like an Azure function or maybe containers even, where you can more dynamically have nodes spin out and spin up. With like Azure Container Apps is a cool new thing. Anyway, sidetracked. So I'm going to get my server farm. I'm going to grab whatever the latest is. And we're going to give it a name. What I like to do is we're going to do the resource group. It's not going to let me grab that, is it? Okay. Resource group. Parens dot name, and this is just using some stream interpolation at service plan, and then plus our env variable above. So what this should do is say foo dev app service plan dev. A lot of devs, but that's okay. And location, we're going to set to location, and then the SKU. And this is the part where sometimes you should be a little more careful if you use other tutorials that are out there. We're using F1 because that stands for free one. So we're going to make sure we don't pay for this. Again, you can specify your OS, and that's a string. Doesn't matter a ton, but typically just use Linux because why not? And the next thing we're going to need is the app service. So we have the server that our app's going to run on. Now we need the app service. That's going to be Microsoft.web/sites. Grab latest there too, equals, and we're going to name this in a similar, is that supposed to be a backtick? That might, no. That might break. We'll come back to that. I can't tell if my handwriting is a quote or a backtick. Source group dot name plus app service plus env. And again, we'll do location is location, properties, and we're going to tell it that we want it to run on the server farm ID of the app service plan above. Boom. You've just written your first infrastructure as code file. That's awesome. So, and if we go back here, we can check on, oh no, our dependencies failed. Oh, our CS Proj solution. What is going on here? Ah, I see. This needs to be dot net app slash. That was my bad. Oh, and I just realized we're going to want to also do a. Where'd that go? We're going to want to add the test project here as well. So that will be .NET SLN add NUnit, and we'll do the CS project. There we go. So they should both be there. Both have the pathing right. So I think that's good. All right, that should fix why we were broken. And again, with DevOps, one thing you'll know consistently see is a lot of things are just kind of trial and error, which is cool. So the next thing we're going to want to do is publish our .NET app. And then we're going to upload it. And then we're going to try to upload our bicep file. So one thing you will notice if you pull this down, I do have the bicep part a little sooner, or this pipeline part a little sooner. Be open to feedback on that. So what it'll essentially do is we're going to first publish our .NET app, so that's going to run it and get it packaged for a production deploy. And the reason I do the bicep file stuff a little earlier, it's a little bit of a transition, or a segue, but it also just fails on purpose. So we'll go to .NET app. That's where our solution will be. Actually, I think our working directory is just going to be here. And I forgot my colon. Upload a build artifact. And we'll just copy this from up here because it's the same. And this is packaging our solution to get ready to deploy it. All right. Now what we're going to want to do, and for the sake of time I'm going to start copying and pasting some stuff, is we're going to have another job. So what I'm going to want to do is on the same level as build. Should be here. We're going to have the merge job. So once code gets into prod, and it's going to need build, or once, and then we're going to say if the build of main was successful, we're going to run this command. And we're going to do a lot of the stuff we did above. And I'll walk through this in a second just so I don't typo it for the sake of time. We're running on the Ubuntu latest. This environment's going to be, sorry, this is, I believe, foo dev. Foo-dev. Foo-dev. All right. So what this is saying is this is going to run against this environment, which means when we grab environments, we're going to grab when we grab secrets, we're going to grab it from the foo-dev area. And the next steps we're going to do is, we're going to download the 2 artifacts we published here. So once they're built, tested, and packaged, we're going to download them here and get ready to deploy them. Excuse me. And now we're going to need to log into Azure from the command line, or from the build runner. So that's what this command is going to do. We're going to do Azure login with those secrets we set previously. And then if you run into any issues logging into, you can actually go to your app registration, which is here, and you can go to certificates and secrets, and you should see the one we did here. And this might actually not work because we didn't set this, so you might need to go back and reset that. So it's our organization, which is nobody, it's me. So if you go to GitHub, it's me and then this repository, so we might need to actually fix that. And then our environment. And then if you go to, oh, where's the other part? There's another way to look at this. Yeah. So you can edit it here. So organization, that should actually be, so that was a mistake on my part. And then our repository is novice to dangerous. Our environment's going to be all of them, but we're going to do foo dev. So this is the credentials to get into foo dev. Actually, let's do branch. So anything that is on branch main will be allowed to get here. Cool, then we fix that. Now, because I'm dumb, we're going to want to run the bicep deploy. So we're logged in. I'm going to take that bicep file we just packaged up above and run it. That'll give us our infrastructure. So we're calling it deploy, Azure RM deploy. We're using our subscription. Our resource group is, and we'll go back to there, foo dev. And I purposely use different names in case you wanted to copy and paste any commands I have. And then our env. This is how you'd specify an env. But again, because we're not specifying one, it'll default to foo dev. So I could remove this and it'd have the same outcome at this point. And finally, assuming all that works, we want to then deploy our .NET app to this application, or this app service. So what we're going to do is this, and it's going to be called app service. If we go here, app service foodev. And then if we git status and git commit, finishing pipeline. And assuming everything works, you should be able to go to Azure. Oh, that's not what I wanted. And in your resource group here, once this gets done running, let's see what this is mad about. Let's call this test app. So if you didn't catch that, it's upset that we have two of these named the same. So what we're going to do is just change that to test app. All right, and then assuming everything gets deployed correctly, we should be able to find our app service up here, and it'll take a minute. But you should be able to go out to your resource group, find your app service. There should be a URL, and then you should be able to throw, let's see if I have, throw weather forecast at the end. See if I still have this app service up. And you have an HTTPS endpoint here that is live and a free HTTPS URL that you don't have to pay for. Well, you kind of do, but you don't have to. If you don't want to put a custom domain behind it, you don't have to. So that's kind of part one of working on the project. There's a few other sample solutions here. If we go to Novice to Dangerous for the Azure Cloud Workshop Continuous Delivery, there's a challenge 1 and a challenge 2. Challenge 2 solution is going to be posted soon, and if there's any other information or any other questions, comments, concerns, feel free to open up a GitHub issue, message me. But otherwise, I hope you have a good day, and I appreciate you watching. And yeah, keep learning. Don't be intimidated, and I will see you all next time.